At 7 years old, we start comparing ourselves to others. Am I less than? Am I more than? Here we go. Something important shifts in our consciousness as we hit about 7 years old. And that's what this episode explores. My hope is that the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old inside of you can find strength and healing from these ideas. This episode is sponsored anonymously by a wonderful Yid in Los Angeles looking to give strength and chizuk to all the people listening to these episodes and looking to grow in themselves and in their relationships. Relationships are too important and too challenging to take for granted. Welcome to The Attached Life, where we explore the magic and the madness of our most meaningful relationships. We're moving along the journey of our development. Over the course of our lives, we started from the earliest places, and now we're up to a very important shift in the way that we develop. A whole new aspect or dimension of how we experience ourselves and the world around us is introduced usually at around the age of 7, maybe a little bit earlier or a little bit later. We start to become aware of what Erikson calls our industry or our inferiority. We start to become aware of whether or not we are good or not good at something. Instead of just engaging in things, we start to compare ourselves to others. We start to evaluate ourselves. We start to think, am I good at this? Am I not good at this? This person seems to be better than me at this. This person is popular. This person is smart. This person is good looking. This person is athletic. This person is funny. Am I those things? Am I less than? Am I more than? We begin to have this lens, this internal awareness and processing of where we rank and how we're performing at different things. This stage is what Erikson refers to in his developmental stages as industry versus inferiority. Do we develop a sense of industry, of competency, of being good at things, or do we develop a sense of inferiority? And this stage, according to Erikson, lasts from 7 until 12 years old. Although I think what's important is that it begins at 7, and of course it continues on, but it's introduced at around the age of 7. If you think about this from the perspective of attachment theory, it's interesting to add two things to this. Number one is that attachment theory would say that while Erikson is right, that at 7 years old we begin to start thinking about how good we are at things. We start comparing ourselves to others and evaluating our performance, our skills, our capacity, our industry. That doesn't change the fact that underneath that, we are still longing deeply for relationship, and that our need to feel connected, to feel attached to others, to feel loved by others, to feel felt by others, simply for who we are, still exists underneath. And even if it's not what we are as consciously absorbed by or thinking about as consciously or in such a focused way, but that need for connection, that need for attachment is still there and hasn't gone anywhere and never will go anywhere. But I think what we could say, maybe even in a more interesting way, is that what attachment theory would add to the stage of industry versus inferiority is that attachment theory would look at the need for industry. Why is it that we start to become driven by being good at things? We start to evaluate ourselves in terms of how good we are at something. We do that because that is how we start to perceive our ability to get relationships. So it's not that we leave the realm of relationship or we leave the realm of needing connection and attachment to others, and we start to now go into this whole world of industry, of performance, of how good we are at things. And it's kind of two different dimensions or two different worlds. But instead, it's that the way we seek and the way we pursue, the way we perceive our ability to attain a relationship and to gain attachment and connection is that now we start to think that the way that we'll gain connection is through our performance, is through how good we are at something. And now, in addition to the home environment and to parents, we introduce into our lives an emphasis on a whole new set of people that we can gain a relationship with through being good at things, namely peers, most importantly, friends, peers, and also teachers. And this brings into our lives at this stage, again, a whole new aspect to our development and to our experience. It's interesting because I don't know too much about Freud. It's not something I've studied in depth, but Freud talks about a latency stage. It's actually the last of the stages that Freud talks about. And the latency stage in Freud is very similar to Erikson's stage of industry versus inferiority. The latency stage is where a person actually begins to now shift away from Freud's psychosexual obsessions with the parents or unconscious experiences of relating to the parents, and now seeks out. That's why it's called the latency stage, because that psychosexuality becomes latent. It becomes under kept inside, underneath, and instead the focus shifts into hobbies and into pursuing activities and things that a person can be good at, and it's branching out more into peers and things of this nature. So in the different developmental theories, this seems to be that at this stage, across the board, formulated in different ways and with different emphasis, that this is how the person begins to experience themselves in the world. I want to add to this also a somatic perspective. If we think about this from a body perspective, psychosomatic perspective, what this means, so again, as we've talked about in other contexts, if we think about our nervous system and our body's state of being as having kind of three different levels, there's our regulated, socially engaged ventral vagal state, which is when we are present and we are embodied in a regulated way. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're completely calm, but we're in a balanced place. Then there's what we call fight-flight, which is our sympathetic nervous system, is our activation. It's when we become activated in our body. Stress hormones are released, adrenaline is released, our muscles begin to tighten, we become ready to fight or to flee. And then we have the freeze state, which is the dorsal vagal, which is the shutdown, is where we become completely either dissociated and shut down if it's from a threatening situation, or within this can also be our ability to become extremely relaxed and extremely calm in a very kind of subdued kind of a way, but it might actually be safe or positive, etc. So those are the different states of being that we have in our body. So if you think about this stage of industry versus inferiority, of trying to prove myself, of trying to see that I'm good at things, trying to perform, trying to have a high level of achievement, what that really relates to in a certain sense is a higher level charge of sympathetic activation, fight-flight. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm actually fighting or that I'm actually fleeing, but the fight version of this is that I'm trying to prove myself. I'm trying to outperform others. I'm trying to be the smartest one in the class or the best one on the court or the most popular person at recess or whatever it is. And I have a certain level of activation in which now I am on and I'm trying to evaluate. And there can be an anxiety embedded in this. And that's where that kind of intensity and that need to prove and that being on edge and evaluating and assessing myself can come into play. On the other hand, if I don't feel that I can succeed, I might actually go into flee. I might be trying to run away from the situations, avoid the situations. Alternatively, I might shut down to just disconnect from whatever's going on around me and going into freeze. So that would be the somatic perspective or somatic angle as to what's going on in the body during this industry versus inferiority stage of starting to try and assess where I rank, where I'm at in the world around me. And so in this shift where we start to move away from simply engaging in things in a kind of careless way, but now I'm becoming more aware and more attuned and more conscious of where I stand and am I good at things. And similarly, I start to move away in a certain sense from only the parental relationship, and I begin to now evaluate myself or look at myself in regards to peers and to teachers, etc. When all of that is going on, that doesn't actually mean that the home is less important, or that the parental relationships, or that the real close, intimate relationships become less important. On the surface, it might seem like they do. But actually, underneath, what that means is that the really close, intimate home relationships are even more important, not less important, but even more important. Because again, if you think about it from a somatic perspective, as we just talked about, or if you think about it from the perspective of how precarious, how fragile that state is, when I'm out there in the world and now I'm comparing myself to others, so now I go into fight flight, I become anxious about it. I'm now needing to prove my worth. And it's so, as I said, it's so fragile. I'm living on the edge. Will I feel that I have industry, or will I feel inferior? Will I be able to manage? Will I be okay? Will I succeed? It's almost, in a sense, dangerous. It's risky. But we need to go through. That's how we develop. That's how we become the people we become. But there is a risk involved in that. It's not simple. Now, if a person has a home base, if a person has relationships that led up to this stage, that until they got to this age, before this new dimension, this new layer of consciousness entered their world, entered their mind, they had a base, a foundation, a home where they felt, where they experienced being loved and accepted and wanted and valued. And they felt that there's a place that their experience has merit, and their inner world is something that has legitimacy. If they experienced all that, they now have a safe anchoring to go out into the world. It's like someone who's going down into some excavation and they anchor themselves above, and they have to make sure that is tied really tight to make sure that they can now let go and go down into the world below. Or if you think of somebody who's trying to float, in order to float in water, you need to let go completely. You need to have trust that you'll be held up. If you have that base, if you have that body of water, that home environment, that you feel, I can let go, I can try, I can see if I can do this. I can experiment with, maybe I will be good at this, and maybe I won't. And if I'm not good at this, that is still going to be okay, because I already have an unconscious trust. None of this is necessarily conscious. This is happening unconsciously. But I have an unconscious trust of the fact that I still have value, that I still am loved, that I have a place to go back to. That at the end of the day, whether or not this goes well at recess, when I try creating this game or not, and people like it, or I try getting involved in the basketball game, or I try talking to these friends or peers who are of a certain type, and I don't know if they'll want to talk to me or they'll think my joke is funny, but I have a sense that maybe it will be successful and maybe it won't, but in the end of the day, I'll be okay, because there's something holding me up in the end of the day. I remember once working with a client who had severe, as an adult, had severe social anxiety. Spent most of his time really just in his room watching TV or YouTube or different things, really just avoiding the world. And when I explored with him a lot of his developmental history, he had a particularly poignant memory, a striking memory in his experience for him of being a kid in kindergarten, really young, and coming up with a game, which is actually even prior to the stage that we're talking about now, although it's really on that border, the very earliest stages of this stage. And he came up with a game that he tried getting his friends to play, and no one wanted to play it with him. And he said that since then, he really never tried initiating anything socially again. Now, offhand, in a vacuum, that doesn't really add up. If just because one failed attempt, so now there can't be a future attempt. What I imagine, and we explored this further, but what I imagine is there was a very shaky foundation to begin with. If a person has a solid foundation, if they're anchored, if they're tied above, if they know that there's water beneath them that they can let go and they'll still be floating, that in the end of the day they come home and they have that basic experience and environment in which they feel secure and they have a secure attachment, then they can experience a failure like that, a setback like that, and they can still feel okay. But if there's a very shaky environment, if the water is not really there to hold them up, if they're not really tied up at the top, not really anchored in that way, So then when something seemingly small like that happens at recess, then it's going to be a real shutdown. It's going to lead to this person being afraid to ever try again. And so in this context, as the child begins to venture out more into the world of trying to sense their own competency, where they're good at things, where they're not good at things, the basic foundation and the underlying sense of having that home environment of security, of attachment, becomes even more important. Rav Matisyahu Solomon actually writes in a book called With Hearts Full of Love. He doesn't say all of this in exactly the way that I'm articulating it, but he actually writes about why he is not a fan of homework. He says, imagine two different scenes. Again, he doesn't say it in exactly this way, I'm paraphrasing. But imagine two different scenes. A kid is in school. Teachers are demanding and expecting a lot of different things. He takes a test. He's at recess, and now he's playing basketball with his friends, or he's playing cards, or hanging out, or trying to sit at the cool lunch table with certain girls or certain boys, or whatever it's going on, he or she, and there's all this stress and all this pressure and all this evaluation. And after a long day of this, the child gets home and walks off the bus, walks up stairs to the front door of their house, and they walk in the door, and the parent who's home, let's say the mother who's home, is busy doing work, or is on her phone, or is just kind of doing whatever they're doing, tidying up, taking care of things in the house. And as the child gets home, the mother says, "Hi, sweetie, how was your day? Do you have homework? Let's do your homework." And after that whole day, that exhausting experience of performing and evaluating, the first thing that happens, in a completely innocent, well-meaning way, the mother might have even said, "How was your day?" Might have even said, "Sweetie," might have even given her a hug. But the very first thing that comes along with all of that is, "Do you have homework?" And now let's get down to your homework. And now let's start doing your homework. And so now it's just a continuation of school and of all of those things that are happening. The evaluating of self as having competency or not having competency just continues on from the peers and from the teachers, and now enters into the home, into the parental relationship as well. Versus a second scene where the child, after that long day of school, also comes home, walks up the front steps into the front door, and the mother is sitting there in the kitchen, in the way Rav Matisyahu Solomon describes it. Maybe the mother is even sitting on the front stoop of the house with a glass of milk and a chocolate chip cookie. And they just sit down together, and that's it. Obviously, this is kind of idyllic. I don't know about your homes, but it sounds almost impossible to imagine when we have a home of numerous kids and so many things going on. But even just the concept of it, to then just sit and to just be, and not have to say something about, "Do you have homework?" And now starting to do homework and becoming the child's teacher or the child's tutor, but instead being able to be the child's parent and to just be with them. And so to allow that school environment, they need the school environment. The idea here is not to get rid of evaluation, not to get rid of the pressure to perform. A person needs that. A person needs to develop in that way. A person needs to experience failure. A person needs to experience success and doing well and seeing where they're good at things and also where they're not good at things. But in order to be able to do that in a healthy way, we also need the respite from that. The respite from that is what enables us and gives us the ability to then go ahead and do those things. But if everywhere in our lives, if in all the environments, it's all this hyper-evaluation, hyper-assessment, always just trying to figure out what level I'm on, what kind of person I am, that becomes toxic, and that becomes defeating of self, and really undermining of the ability to just be in this world in a way that I can even be successful even when I am successful. So as this new layer of our experience enters into our world, school begins to take on a very strong role. And we've talked a lot about traumas and experiences that can take place in the home environment. But now what we're introduced to is the challenges that arise in the school environment. And I think, as we know, there are many. The school environment can be incredibly nurturing. It can be so profoundly impactful in such a positive way. And it often is. And it also presents a lot of different challenges for different people. One of the reasons that school can be very challenging is because the school environment, the academic environment, really presents a very narrow version, a narrow focus on success. So in the very young years, in the younger years, there is a variety of activities kids do in school. Arts and crafts and plays and music and coloring and all sorts of different things, and learning in a more typical way. But there's a variety of different activities. And so that allows different kids to shine in different ways. But as we get older, school becomes more and more narrow in what's focused on. And typically it becomes a very limited focus on a particular region of the brain. And kids who have a strong capacity in that aspect of things, in the analytical, memorizing, understanding, the rational part of the brain, the logical, sequential way of thinking, in the ability to work within a system, within a classroom setting, the ability to sit and focus, to sit at a desk, to listen, to hear a frontal lecture, to read and absorb information from a book, and to then be able to spit that information back, to be able to ask good questions, etc. That kind of brain, which some people are blessed with, does very, very well in the school setting and begins to experience a sense of competency and industry and value. But so many kids, so many people have strengths in other ways and may not have that particular strength. The ability to sit at a desk and listen, the ability to learn from hearing someone speak, the ability to learn from reading a book, the ability to memorize information, the ability to then understand questions and respond to those questions and give the information back, the ability to write that out on a test, etc. These kinds of things may not be everyone's strength. And because school has such a narrow focus, but takes up such an enormous chunk of our lives at this stage, people can begin to develop a sense of inferiority in a global way, when really the only thing going on is that you're not that great at this particular aspect of life. But there are so many aspects of life that you are great at. But because school takes on such centrality and school has such a narrow focus, if the way that school evaluates your capacity to do things well does not align with the ways in which you are capable of doing things well, a person can begin to internalize a belief about self globally of I'm not good at things, I'm not capable of succeeding, I'm not smart. When the reality is that this person might be incredibly smart in other ways. I remember I was once with a friend of mine after I'd gotten married who we had all this new IKEA furniture, and I had a friend come over to help me build it, and because I'm completely incapable of doing anything like that. It's totally gibberish to me. If I look at the instructions, I try and figure it out. It's not at all my thing. I was a decent student in school, nothing exceptional, but decent, average student in school. But again, something like building a bookshelf, following instructions for that, totally incompetent. I had a friend who was there trying to help me who was someone I knew from yeshiva, from school, was not a particularly great student. He was in the, let's say, the lower range of learning in yeshiva or in school academically. And it was just an amazing moment for me because I watched him pick up the booklet for the IKEA instructions and literally flip through the whole thing in a matter of seconds and say, okay, let's go. I knew exactly what to do. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. Because there's different types of smart. Such a simple experience, such a simple example. But imagine this guy or anyone like him going through school with that kind of smart, really doesn't have a place in the classroom. So they never experience themselves as the one who is smart, when in reality, they are just as smart as anyone else, just that their smartness is in different ways. I work with a student now, with a client now, who is always on the brink of being kicked out of school. And all I'm trying to do with him is hold on to be able to just graduate, because I know that this guy's skill sets are going to make him an amazing entrepreneur. I'm not worried about him at all. He's just not made for school. He is going to shine. I know it with certainty. He's going to shine. He just needs to withstand these years without allowing it to impact him to believe that he won't be able to shine. Because all his skills and his strengths are perfect for when he gets to a place of entrepreneurial, starting a business, doing different things like that. But in a school classroom structure, he is totally lost. It just doesn't work. There's a line that I heard from Rabbi Yanki Horowitz that I try to really use a lot with this particular client or others like him, where Rabbi Horowitz has said that he tells this to people, to parents and to students all the time. He says, what I need you to remember is that life is longer than school. Life is longer than school. You have tremendous skills and talents and abilities and ways that you can shine. And school might not be the environment for that. And just remember, life is longer than school. Don't allow the school experience to create an internalization of not being able to be competent. It's just that the competencies that school asks for are not your strengths. Now, none of this means that we shouldn't try to develop more competency in these ways. And it also means it's in both directions. The people who don't excel at what school asks for can grow and can develop more competency and can get better at these things. And it also means in the other direction that schools would do well. And I think as a community, we are in many ways making a lot of improvements in this area. We still have ways to go, but we are making a lot of improvements to make sure that schools expand the range of what kinds of things, what kinds of activities and experiences students have, so that it's not so narrow and so limited. The second way that school presents a challenge is because at this stage of life that we're talking about, these early years, the brain is still very much developing. It is not completely developed yet. And there are actually many people who might not perform well or experience themselves as being smart or so capable, whether it's socially, athletically, academically, might not be great at the school age. Because it's sometimes what happens is that the brain for certain people develops at a different pace. And sometimes there can be kind of like a quantum leap that happens later on in their brain development. So sometimes it's at 18 or 21 that all of a sudden this person is now very socially skilled, while they were in fourth grade and they were socially fumbling all the time. And the challenge is, again, to not allow that experience in fourth grade to create the internalized belief that I'm socially incapable. Because really, this person still has a tremendous amount of potential and development that might happen later that will change the whole game for them, change their whole experience. But they need to hold on to be able to get there. And again, that's where the secure attachments and the home environment and having the right kinds of nurturance come in so importantly. And for us, looking back on our childhood, looking back on our development as adults, to think about, where did we need to hear these messages? Where would these messages have been so important to us? What would have been different if I had known this? If I had learned, if I had been told life is longer than school? If I had known that in 10 years from now, I will actually be really socially capable. I'll actually be playing in adult intramural basketball league, and I'll actually be one of the better players, even though in sixth grade I was slow and didn't know what I was doing. But if I would have been told, you know what, you're actually going to be totally capable. Or I'll actually be able to. I'll be on a retreat with other people, and I'll be able to tell a story, and people will laugh, or people will be engaged. Even when I'm sitting in the lunchroom in fifth grade and feeling like I don't know what to say, and when I say something, I feel dumb. If I had known these things, if I had been told these things, if I had the home environment, the attachments, how would things have felt different to me? And if I can identify that, we can then go inside and find that younger part of ourselves still sitting in the lunchroom, or still standing awkwardly in the gym, or still spacing out in the classroom feeling badly about himself or herself. We can find that younger part, and we can talk to her, talk to him. We can update. We can give them a hug. We can tell them about what life will look like. We can let them know that even if they're not good at X or Y, there's other things. And unfortunately, the environment may not have allowed for those things to surface, but they're there. And if we have that conversation, if we can reparent, re-nurture that younger part of ourselves that still lives in us, we can often reorient and reconfigure and shift so much of what exists inside of us to heal so many of those different types of wounds that we experience. Back when I was still teaching in a high school, I had a student who was really socially very alone and academically struggled a lot. And I knew, though, that he was very artistic. But in school, there was really no context in which that existed. So I actually I spoke to the athletic director, and I asked if we could have a school logo design competition to make a new logo for the sports teams, and that students would be given the opportunity to create the design and submit it, knowing that that would be an opportunity for this student to be able to do something in the school environment in front of peers where he would be able to excel. And the transformation that happened for this student from this experience where he won the competition and people were amazed by what he drew and what he designed, and the amount of attention he was able to receive from that positive attention, and to feel that there is something that he had amazing competency in, and the ways that that was able to create relationships for him. Obviously, it wasn't to solve all, and there were still challenges, but he was a different person after that. So if you were not the type of person who did so well in school and that was a struggle and that created challenges or possibly insecure beliefs, imagine there was someone who was able to do something like that for you and what that would have felt like. And in your mind, give yourself that corrective experience, that vitamin as we've spoken about. Imagine that playing itself out, whether it was acting or singing, music, art, a different sport that your school didn't have, and how that experience would have changed you, would have nurtured you, would have given you a relationship. And imagine that coming to fruition. Notice what that feels like in your body. Notice what it's like to experience the connection and the sense of capacity, of capability, of adequacy, of competency. And imagine coming home after a day of school with a loving parent sitting on the front steps with a glass of milk and a warm chocolate chip cookie, with nothing else besides love and presence, nothing in the world to distract them, and just being able to be. And notice that the more that you have that in your life, the more you'll be willing to take risks, the more that you'll be okay if you have to fail. The more you can take the risk of putting yourself out there to try and succeed in something challenging or something that you know might not be successful. And allowing yourself to move from the stress activation, the fight, flight, or freeze, into a balanced regulation, where you take the active energy, but you bring that into a place where it feels more balanced. There's a teaching, it's a pasuk, a verse in Tehillim in Psalms that says, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid, I place Hashem before me, I place God before me always. But I was thinking about this recently, that the word shivisi is also similar to the word shavah, which means equalizing or balancing. So we're looking to find that balance of unconditional love with conditional love, with unconditional love of a sense of security, of attachment, of connection, which allows for now the possibility of trying to succeed, of trying to perform, trying to do something in a way that has productivity and results. And so often people see these different things as those two aspects as being contradictory or mutually exclusive. If I have unconditional love, why would I want to try and do anything? If I'm trying to do something, then obviously it's not unconditional. But it's really not the case at all. One really nurtures and feeds off the other. And when we have both, we have that balance, that shaveh.